Hi dear students, today we begin our lesson with chapter number 12, Energy and Respiration. In this chapter we will study all about the energy and the processes involved that produce energy. After reading this chapter, you should be able to outline the needs of energy in living organism, describe the role of ATP as the universal energy currency, explain how energy from complex organic molecule is transferred to ATP in the process of respiration. Compare the different energy values of respiratory substrates. Describe how to use simple respirometer and compare how respiration takes place in aerobic and anaerobic condition. So, these were the 6 points that we are going to cover in this chapter. Dear students, look at this structure. This is the structure of animal cell. All eukaryotic cell, whether they are plant cell or animal cell, they contain mitochondria in them. Mitochondria is a double membrane organelle. The outer membrane is smooth and relatively permeable to small molecule. The inner membrane is less permeable as compared to the outer membrane. Dear students, mitochondria was an ancient bacteria. Now it is part of the living cells, plant and animal, part of the eukaryotic cells. Dear students, remember that mitochondria has its own DNA, and this DNA is said to be mitochondrial DNA. These DNA are circular and the DNA is double-stranded DNA. Now you can see that it is circular and it is alpha helix, not alpha helix but double-stranded, twisted over just like over one another, just like a twisted ladder. Dear students, remember that this DNA is composed of 37 genes. Okay, and these 37 genes are responsible to produce or to code for 2 ribosomal RNA, 22 transfer RNA, 13 polypeptides. And this mitochondrial DNA encoded polypeptides are all subunits of enzyme complexes of oxidative phosphorylation. As the name suggests, respiration, the process of respiration is a very complex process, and the aerobic respiration actually takes place in this part of the cell. Okay, and this requires enzyme complexes. There are 4 enzyme complexes, and the enzyme complexes or subunit of all those complexes, they are encoded by the DNA present inside the mitochondria. Dear student, remember one thing more. We inherit mitochondrial DNA only from the mother, okay, not from the father. 100% from the mother. Okay, for example, we inherit the mitochondrial DNA from the mother. Our mother inherit them from her mother, and so on. It means that it is only the female they inherit or they transfer mitochondrial DNA from one another. Okay, father don't have any role in transferring mitochondrial DNA from one generation to the next generation. Okay, for example, look at here. Now this is the mother and this is the father. Now this is said to be the mitochondria. It contains mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is only inherited from the mother. Okay, and this is the nuclear DNA. The nuclear DNA partly from the mother and partly from the father. Okay, 50% and 50% and 100% from the mother. Okay, now dear students, look at here. This is the nucleus and the nuclear DNA. Okay, now for example, we inherit from the parents, they inherit them from their parents, okay, and they inherit from their parents, and so on. Okay, it means that this DNA or the nuclear DNA comes from both parents. Now look at here, the mitochondrial DNA. Okay, we inherit from the mother. They inherit from their mother, and so on. Okay, the mitochondrial DNA only comes from the mother, not from the father. Okay, it's very important to remember because we are going to explain it in the next lesson. Now look at here. This is the nuclear DNA comes partly from the mother and partly from the father, and this is the mitochondrial DNA comes only from the mother. Okay, a baby with three parents. Dear students, let me introduce to you the three parents. Two of the parents are very obvious, for example, mother and father, and there is also a third parent, and that is called the donor. Okay, the nucleus is removed from an egg from the mother and inserted into donor egg, from which the nucleus has been removed. Then the donor egg was with its healthy mitochondria, and a nucleus from mother is placed in a dish, and about 100,000 motile sperm cells from father are added. The fertilized egg is inserted into mother's uterus, where a healthy embryo develops. The students, remember one thing. This is a mother, and it contains the mitochondrial DNA, which is only inherited from the mother. Now we studied that this DNA coded for 2 ribosomal RNA, 22 transfer RNA, 13 polypeptides, and all the subunits they are used, or subunits of enzyme, they are used in the complexes of oxidative phosphorylation. Now the nuclear DNA of the mother is 100% normal, but there is a defect in the mitochondrial DNA. For example, a slight mutation can result in a huge disaster in the living organism, and they can badly damage the vital organs like liver, like nerve tissue, like heart. Okay, they damage these tissues. Okay, because these are highly active cells, or these are highly active parts of the body. So a slight mutation can damage those vital organs of the body. Now, how it can be treated? It can be treated to remove this mitochondrial DNA. For example, this should not be inherited to their offspring. How can we do that? All what we need is just to take the nuclear DNA from the mother, which is almost 50%. Okay, we inherit them from 50% from the mother and 50% from the father. Now the donor only donate the mitochondrial DNA. Now look at here. This is the donor cell. Nucleus is removed. Okay, what is left? The mitochondria is left, because this mitochondria is healthy and it codes for the normal subunits of enzymes complexes. They are used in the oxidative phosphorylation. Oxidative phosphorylation is the first step in the process of respiration. Now look at here. This is the cell, but it does not contain the nucleus. Okay, now nucleus, this is the mother nucleus, is placed right here, and now this cell is 100% normal. Okay, because it contains the DNA that has the right and they have the correct mitochondria. Okay, and this mitochondria also contain the right genes. They produce the right enzyme complexes in the used in the oxidative phosphorylation. Dear students, let me explain one more term over here. This fusion of male gametes to the female gamete is said to be fertilization, because this fertilization takes place outside the body. Therefore, this fertilization is said to be in vitro fertilization. In vitro fertilization. The need of energy in living organism. Simply, or in other words, we can say that why living organisms need energy. For what? Number one, all living organisms require a continuous supply of energy to stay alive. For example, our brain constantly using energy. Brain cells are the highly active cell inside your body, and they constantly use energy. Your liver cells are highly active cells. Your heart cells are highly active cells. They require lots of energy even when you are at rest. They either absorb sunlight energy or chemical potential energy. How energy can be supplied or produced? Number one, some of the living organisms like plants, they are energy transducers. They convert one form of energy like sunlight to another form of energy like chemical potential energy. Living organisms like animal, they obtain their food in the form of chemical potential energy from other living organisms like animals or plants. The process of photosynthesis transfers sunlight energy to chemical potential energy. Almost all life on Earth depends on photosynthesis either directly or indirectly. For example, let's suppose herbivores. Herbivores are the living organisms that directly depend on the process of photosynthesis. They obtain their food from the plants. Other animals like lions, they indirectly depend on the process of photosynthesis. For example, they feed on the herbivores. The herbivores feed on the plants. And the plants are actually the living organism. They convert sunlight energy into chemical potential energy. All biological molecules such as carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acid contain carbon. So it means that biological molecules are said to be organic because carbon containing compounds are said to be organic. Okay, all organic compounds contain carbon and hydrogen both. Therefore, in other words, we can say that the study of hydrocarbons are also called organic chemistry. Organisms may be autotrophic or heterotrophic. Autotrophic organisms are all those organisms that are capable of producing their own food particles. Heterotrophic organisms are all those organisms that are incapable of producing their own food particles. Plants are autotrophic organisms and the rest, all living organisms, are said to be heterotrophic. Some of the organisms like nitrifying bacteria, those are said to be the chemoautotrophic. Organic molecule. In this chapter we are going to study some of the organic molecules like proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. So all these contain carbon and hydrogen, therefore all these molecules are said to be organic. An organic molecule is a compound including carbon and hydrogen. Organic molecule can be used by living organisms in two ways. Number one, they can serve as building blocks for making other organic molecules. They are essential for living organisms. For example, amino acids are actually the building bricks for larger molecules like proteins. So, or fatty acid and glycerol are the building bricks for larger molecules like lipids. And for example, simple sugar are building bricks for larger molecules like carbohydrates. For example, starch, glycogen, cellulose. These are actually the molecules that are required inside the bodies of living organisms. They can represent chemical potential energy that can be released by breaking down the molecule in respiration. Now those building bricks, for example, those larger molecules like carbohydrates, lipids, and fats, these larger molecules again can be broken to release energy. For example, mostly we use carbohydrates as a source of energy. Specifically, the brain cell uses carbohydrates to release energy. Proteins contain larger amount of hydrogen atoms, therefore proteins produce more energy as it is produced by the carbohydrates. And the lipids contain even more hydrogen as compared to the protein and carbohydrates. Therefore, lipids produce twice as much energy as it is produced by carbohydrates. Now, what is work? Work in living organisms include, number one, the synthesis of complex substances from simple one. We explain them in a few moments. For example, monomers. Monomers are actually the smaller units. They link up with one another to form a larger molecule like polymers. Polymers are said to be complex substances. So amino acid, in for example, are said to be the monomers, and proteins are said to be the polymer. So, and the process by which smaller molecules link up with one another to form larger molecule are said to be polymerization, because simple unit called monomer repeat itself for over and over and over again to form longer chain. The active transport of substances against a diffusion gradient. There are two types of transportation inside the bodies of living organism. One is called passive transport, in which molecules move from higher concentration to lower concentration. They do not require energy. This type of transportation is said to be passive transport. For example, diffusion and osmosis are said to be passive transport because they do not require any metabolic energy. Instead, molecule can be moved from lower concentration to higher concentration by the consumption of some of the metabolic energy, and that is said to be the active transport. For example, soil contain much smaller amount of mineral A's compared to minerals in the roots. Now, minerals in the root are actually obtained from the soil. Now, plant can use some of the energy to withdraw minerals from the soil into the roots. This type of transportation is said to be active transport because molecules are actually moving from lower concentration to higher concentration. In other words, we can also say that the cell membrane contain pores. Okay, those pores can only allow smaller molecule like water molecule to pass through it. Sugar molecule cannot pass through it. So there are some carrier proteins. Those carrier protein uses some of the energy to move larger molecule into the cell. This type of transportation is said to be active transport because they provide energy. Mechanical work such as muscle contraction, for example playing football or cricket, or for example going to the gym, exercising, etc. These require some muscle contraction and they are said to be mechanical work. They use lots of energy. The energy comes from the respiration. In a few organisms, number one, bioluminescence and electric discharge. Some of the living organisms perform some chemical reactions inside their bodies and they produce luminance, means light. Those light can be used for different purposes, to protect or to see things around. Okay, and they also produce electric discharge. This electric discharge can be used to protect and also to threat the predator animal. Now look at here. You can see that these are different types of living organism and they produce smaller amount of light. Okay, specifically deep down in the sea they are unable to see things. So for example, this is an insect and then also produce, there is a chemical reaction right here and those chemical reaction produce light energy. Okay, same is the case with other living organism. This type of chemical reaction are said to be bioluminescence, means chemical reaction inside the living organism to produce light energy. Ectotherm and endotherm. Ecto means outside over here and therm means heat. It means that temperature of the living organism is maintained by the environment. In other words, we can say cold-blooded animal. Cold-blooded animal are said to be ectotherms because the environment decides their body temperature. For example, if the temperature of the environment is 0 degrees centigrade, so their body temperature is also 0 degrees centigrade. If the temperature of the environment is 40 degrees centigrade, their body temperature is also 40 degrees centigrade. Endotherm, endo means within or inside. It means that some of the living organisms, they maintain their body temperature from inside their environment. For example, these living organisms are said to be warm-blooded animals. Mammals and birds are said to be endotherm because they maintain their body temperature constant regardless of the temperature of the environment. For example, a human, whether the temperature of the environment is 45 degrees centigrade or it is 0 degrees centigrade, they will always maintain their body temperature exactly at 37 degrees centigrade. It means that it never changes because most of the chemical reaction inside the bodies of humans work best when the temperature is around 37 degrees centigrade. One thing more I would like to add over here is ectotherms are less active when the temperature is very cold, and also they protect their self in the burrows, specifically in very hot weather. Mammal and birds use thermal energy that is released from metabolic reactions to maintain a constant body temperature. They are endotherms. They release enough energy within their bodies. And most animals are ectotherms. The thermal energy that warms them comes from the outside their bodies. Energy requirements and production in living organism. Number 1. For a living organism to do work, energy requiring reaction must be linked to those that yields energy. Okay. In the complex oxidation of glucose in aerobic condition, a large quantity of energy is made available. Okay. So glucose is one form of energy, is a form of energy. It can be converted to other forms of energy. Okay. How? Let's see. Now, glucose combined with oxygen to produce carbon dioxide gas, water, and lots of energy. Okay, or in other words, we can say that 1 mole of glucose when combined with 6 mole of oxygen, they produce 6 mole of carbon dioxide gas and 6 mole of water, along with 2870 kilojoules of energy. So, this is actually a chemical reaction. Now, this chemical reaction or this chemical process is not as simple as it is written. It requires almost 4 steps to complete this process, and those 4 steps are glycolysis, link reaction, Krebs cycle, oxidative phosphorylation. It is a very complex and very lengthy process that converts glucose molecule into carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Reaction such as this takes place in the series of small steps, each releasing a small quantity of total available energy. ATP is energy currency. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, is energy currency. It means that inside the bodies there are hundreds and thousands of chemical reactions taking place, hundreds and thousands of different processes taking place. Okay, all these processes requires energy in the form of ATP. It means that every action or every function inside the body requires currency, and that currency is said to be ATP. When a phosphate group is removed from ATP, adenosine diphosphate is formed and 30.5 kilojoules of energy is released. Number 2. Another phosphate is removed and again the same amount of energy is produced. Another phosphate is removed and 14.2 kilojoules of energy is produced. Still, in the past, the bond attaching the 2 outer phosphate group have been called high energy bond because more energy is released when they are broken than when the last phosphate is released. But this is not always the case. It depends on the type of molecules. Okay, for example, carbohydrates and proteins along with the fats all have a single covalent bonds. Okay, it is not the type of bond that decide how much energy should be released. It is actually the type of molecule that releases energy. For example, we study that carbohydrates, proteins, and fats all contain covalent bonds. Okay, but the energy production is completely different from one another. Because the type of molecule decides how much energy should be released. Okay, not the type of bond. For example, this is adenosine triphosphate. This structure is said to be adenosine 1, 2, 3. There are 3 phosphates, so triphosphate. Okay, removing one molecule, another molecule, that releases energy, and this energy can be used for different purposes. Hydrolysis. Let me introduce to you 2 terms. Hydrolysis is the process by which larger molecules are broken to release smaller ones. Okay, and condensation is the complete opposite of hydrolysis. Smaller molecules link up with one another to form larger molecules. For example, protein is a larger molecule. It can be broken to release adenosine, removing 1, 2, or 3 third phosphate. Hydrolysis of ATP means a removal of first phosphate, another phosphate, another phosphate. This is said to be ATP, or hydrolysis of ATP. Okay, ATP is a larger molecule. Breaking them apart is said to be the hydrolysis with the help of water. The term hydro comes from the water. Okay, it means that this process requires water. Lysis means breaking. For example, ATP with the addition of water can be converted into adenosine diphosphate with phosphate group and inorganic phosphate, plus 13.5 kilojoules of energy is produced. It is estimated that a resting human uses about 40 kilogram of ATP in 24 hours, but at any one time contains only about 5 grams of ATP. Okay, so it means that there is a huge difference between 40 kilogram and 5 grams. So inside the body there are lots of processes. For example, your liver cells, your brain cells, your heart cells, they're constantly using energy even when you are resting. Okay, and also 50% of the available energy is used by pumps in the cell membrane. For example, there are 3 different types of pumps, and those are sodium pump, potassium pump, and sodium potassium pump. These require smaller amount of energy, but there are hundreds and thousands, and not hundreds and thousands but millions of these pumps, and they use lots of energy to perform their job. Okay, during the strenuous exercises, ATP breakdown may be as much as 0.5 kilogram per minute. Okay, the cell energy yielding reaction are linked to ATP synthesis. The ATP is then used by the cell in all forms of work. Okay, ATP is the energy currency of the cell. Synthesis of ATP. Now, this is one of the most important process. I would like you to pay great attention to this topic. Okay, ATP is very important and where it is produced. One of the organelle inside the body that is called mitochondria. We introduced mitochondria to you at the beginning of this chapter, that it is a double membrane organelle. The outer membrane, the inner membrane, and the space between the two membrane, intermembrane space. The inner membrane contains some enzyme complexes, and those enzyme complexes are said to be ATP synthase. ATP synthase uses 3 protons, means hydrogen ions, to release 1 ATP from adenosine diphosphate and inorganic phosphate. Energy for ATP synthesis can become available in 2 ways. Number 1, in respiration, energy released by reorganizing chemical bonds during glycolysis and Krebs cycle is used to make ATP. Number 2, most ATP in cell is generated using electrical potential energy. This energy is from the transfer of electron by electron carrier in mitochondria and chloroplast. We are going to study them in the 4th step of respiration. Okay, it is stored as difference in proton. Protons, why we call hydrogen ion proton? Because hydrogen atom contain 1 electron and 1 proton. If electron is removed, what is left? Only proton, no neutron, no electron. Therefore, hydrogen ion is said to be proton. Okay, it is stored as difference in proton concentration across some phospholipid membrane in mitochondria and chloroplast, which are essentially impermeable to proton. Dear students, remember this structure. This is the inner membrane of mitochondria. Okay, now it contains some complex. This structure is said to be ATP synthase. Now you can see that This is intermembrane space, the space between outer membrane and inner membrane, and there are lots of hydrogen ions over here. Okay, now when one hydrogen ion move down, what happens? ATP tightly bind to inorganic phosphate. Another hydrogen move down, ATP is formed, and another hydrogen move down and ATP is released. It actually requires three steps: binding of adenosine diphosphate to inorganic phosphate, and formation of ATP and release of the ATP. So three hydrogen ions move down. For example, as the hydrogen ion move down this complex, it rotates and it actually combines adenosine diphosphate with inorganic phosphate to produce adenosine triphosphate. And it rotates just like a rotor, and it produces ATP. This molecule is said to be ATP synthase. ATP synthase. Protons are allowed to flow down their concentration gradient through protein that span the phospholipid bilayer. For example, this layer is said to be phospholipid bilayer. Hydrogen move down or flow down, and they can be used to release energy. Number 2, part of this proton acts as enzymes that synthesizes ATP and is called ATP synthase or ATPase simply. The transfer of 3 protons allows the production of one ATP molecule, provided that adenosine diphosphate and inorganic phosphate are available inside the organelles. For example, if adenosine diphosphate and inorganic phosphate both act as raw material for the adenosine triphosphate. If no raw material are available, so no ATP could be produced. The process occurs between both in mitochondria and chloroplast. The process was first proposed by Peter Mitchell in 1961 and is called chemiosmosis. For example, moving hydrogen or flowing hydrogen from the intermembrane space into the matrix or mitochondrial matrix and production of ATP. This process is said to be chemiosmosis. Now, how ATP are synthesized? We studied that ATP synthase has 3 binding sites in a part of the molecule gamma that rotate as hydrogen ion or proton passes. This produces structural changes in the binding sites and allow them to pass sequentially through 3 phases. Number 1, binding of ADP and PI, inorganic phosphate and adenosine diphosphate, forming tightly bound ATP, releasing ATP. The role of ATP in active transport. Active transport requires energy. Active transport is the movement of molecule or ion across a partially permeable membrane against a concentration gradient. Concentration gradient means when there is high and low concentration. So we can say that there is a concentration gradient. For example, if both are the same, then we say they are in equilibrium. So moving molecule from lower concentration to higher concentration requires energy, and that type of transportation is said to be active transport. Energy is needed from ATP to counteract the tendency of these particles to move by diffusion down the gradient. All cells shows differences in the concentration of ions, in particular sodium and potassium ion, inside the cell with respect to surrounding solution. Most cells seem to have sodium pumps in the cell's surface membrane that pump sodium ions out of the cell. This also requires energy. Potassium ions or potassium pump move potassium into the cell. Sodium potassium pump are the pumps that move sodium ion out of the cell and potassium ion into the cell at the same time. This is usually coupled with the ability to pump potassium ion from the surrounding solution into the cell. The sodium-potassium pump. The sodium-potassium pump is the protein that spans the cell surface membrane. It has binding sites for sodium ion and for ATP on the inner side and for potassium ions on the outside. Okay. The protein acts as ATPase and catalyzes the hydrolysis of ATP to adenosine diphosphate and inorganic phosphate, releasing energy to drive the pump. The importance of active transport in ions movement into and out of a cell should not be underestimated. About 50% of the ATP used by resting mammal is devoted to maintaining the ionic content of the cell. Okay, 50%. It means that at the beginning of this chapter we studied that a resting human usually uses 40 kilograms of ATP. So 50% of this ATP is used by sodium-potassium pump. Respiration. Respiration is the oxidation of food to release energy. But as the definition explained, it is not as simple as we explain them in a single sentence. There are 4 processes involved. Okay, in all steps releases smaller amount of energy. Respiration is the process in which organic molecules act as fuel. For example, proteins, carbohydrates and proteins. These can be used to release energy. Remember one thing, that carbohydrates is actually the fuel that releases energy. Proteins releases energy, but protein can never be used as a source of energy. In some of the diet like keto diet, protein can be used as a source of energy. Okay. Specifically, the brain cell uses carbohydrates. Okay. Now, training your brain cell to use protein as a source of energy requires about 2 to 3 months to produce new enzymes in order to work accordingly. The organic molecules are broken down in a series of stages to release chemical potential energy, which is used to synthesize ATP. The main fuel for most cells is carbohydrates, usually glucose. Glucose breakdown is divided into 4 stages. Number 1, glycolysis, link reaction, Krebs cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation.